Hi, I'm Jeff Fouts, a tax attorney located in Metro Atlanta with a nationwide law practice helping clients who have serious IRS problems. Every year the IRS receives information on you. Information such as W-2 earnings or Form 1099 items such as interest or dividend income, maybe self-employed or contractor income, mortgage interest paid, and other items. They know a lot about you and a lot about me. The IRS computer system is very powerful. What it does is it scans, it reviews this information periodically, it cross-checks, and what it's doing, it's comparing the information that they received from you against the tax return information that you filed. And so if you filed a tax return that doesn't appear to have included all the income that they have reported on you, the computer issues a special letter called a CP-2000 asking to be paid. And if you don't pay them, they'll start collection procedures. But the IRS computer system, if it does not find a tax return for you at all, and the information appears to show that there's enough income where you should have filed a tax return, they send you a different kind of letter requesting that you file a tax return for that particular tax year. If you don't file a tax return yourself, the IRS will file one for you, and that's a special tax return called a substitute tax return. And then after they do that, they'll give you 90 days to respond to them. If you don't respond to this notice, the IRS will then go ahead and post that tax return to the system, begin sending out their series of collection notices, and when they're done with that, they'll take collection action against you, and this includes wage levies and bank levies. So it's not too good. So let me give you an example of a client where all of this happened. We were hired by a high-level executive from a Fortune 500 company, but don't worry, this happens to mom and pops, this happens to normal folks all across the country all the time. So it doesn't matter what kind of person or wage earner you are. But anyway, this person was hit by an IRS wage levy. And this client told us that his employer had transferred him all around the United States frequently during the last 10 years. And he also told us that his W-2s always showed his correct address. And so he thought that he was actually telling the IRS where he lived and that he'd had enough withholdings. The problem is he hadn't filed an original tax return in 10 years because he'd been preoccupied with various life issues and moving. But the IRS got his attention when they hit him with a wage levy that took away most of his take-home pay. And this could happen to anyone, not just, someone like him. Well, the first flaw in this client's logic was that he thought that the IRS was updating his address in their computer system whenever they got a W-2 on him. This is incorrect. The IRS does not update your mailing address when they get a W-2 on you. Your address in the IRS system is updated only two ways. Number one, if you file an original tax return, or number two, if you file a Form 8822 change of address form and you mail that to the IRS. But this client didn't do either one of those things. The second flaw in this client's logic was that he was having sufficient witholdings. He thought he was. And yes, it turned out that he was due refunds because he had 5 children and he itemized his deductions. But the IRS didn't know any of this. They didn't know how many children he had. They didn't know that he was going to itemize his deductions. They didn't know any of this. And so when they filed the substitute returns on his behalf, they didn't allow him any of that stuff. Okay? They filed on him as if he was single. Okay, and it showed a big tax liability. And so then they began collecting that tax debt. So once the collection process had reached a certain point, the IRS is allowed to use enforcement action. And that's exactly what they did. So actually he made it easy for the IRS. They knew where he worked every year. Every time he moved, they knew exactly where he was because because the company sent in W-2s. So he was like a sitting duck whenever they got ready to come levy him. The IRS would not reduce the wage levy. Sometimes they will, a lot of times they will, until the taxpayer filed original tax returns to replace the substitute tax returns. as well as they wanted him to receive his current tax filings. A lot of times the IRS will lift the wage levy, but in this case they just wouldn't. They were stubborn, and so we had to work around it. So the good news for him, the bad news is they wouldn't lift the wage levy. The good news for this particular taxpayer is that he had other funds that he could use to pay his everyday living expenses. And that was good news because it took him nearly 3 months to file his original tax returns and another 3 to 4 months for the IRS to process them and correct his tax liability. So this client put himself in a highly charged emotional position because he didn't file his original tax returns in a timely manner. It turned out that the taxpayer had been over withholding for most of those 10 years. The refund statute had expired on all but the most recent 3 years. That's really bad news, and that meant he lost some of the refunds he had coming to him. And that's a waste, all because he couldn't get around to preparing his tax returns. So what's the moral of this story? The moral is, file your tax returns on time, even if you can't afford to pay them. And if you haven't filed them on time, contact a tax professional who can obtain your IRS records to see if the IRS has prepared any of the tax returns for you. Don't wait until the IRS issues a levy against you before you decide to deal with your tax problem. It's going to be much more painful if you do. So I hope this important video tip has helped you understand the IRS a little bit better and about how tax problems are solved. Chances are you have questions or concerns about your own particular tax problem. What I encourage you to do is pick up the phone and call me. I can answer your questions. Over the past 20 years, I've represented clients in all 50 states and 29 foreign countries, and I welcome your call. You can reach me at the phone number on this video or by email at the letter J and then Fouts, jfouts@taxhelpattorney.com. I'm Jeff Fouts, and thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.